Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. Also known as Biohazard Last Escape in Japan, what we now know as the third installment of the Resident Evil franchise. I say this because Resident Evil Nemesis was originally planned to be a spin-off game about a random survivor trying to escape Raccoon City. While another team was working on what was supposed to be Resident Evil 3, they were shifted to a new Resident Evil project for the PlayStation 2, and this spin-off game was promoted to Resident Evil 3. The random survivor was then swapped out for a familiar face, that one being Jill Valentine from the first game, and the narrative was reworked for Jill to be what we now know as Resident Evil 3 Nemesis.
Resident Evil.
I know that was a little bit different of a way to start this one. I know I haven't really dived in much to the development history of these games. I actually skipped a lot of stuff about the rewrite of Resident Evil 2, just because that game is so beefy, it really didn't seem necessary. If you haven't seen either of my videos about the last two games, go ahead and check those out first so you can get caught up with where we're at. And then go ahead and come back to this one. I literally won't go anywhere. It will remember your spot. You'll just click it, and then I'll be right back here where you were. But I think the history of Nemesis being a spin-off is very important to the rest of the game, because Resident Evil 3 is unlike any of the games that have come before. It is still a survival horror with fixed camera angles and pre-rendered backgrounds, but it's also a very action-heavy escape story. Unlike the previous titles, before starting the game you're given the option to select between two difficulty options, easy and hard mode. Hard mode is your standard Resident Evil experience with minimal resources and bullet spongy monsters. But easy mode starts the game off with an assault rifle and an item box full of every weapon and ammo imaginable. So you can play through the game trying to mow down anything in your path. This mode almost makes it feel like the Resident Evil 5 of the original trilogy. Sorry guys, every trilogy has one. The story's timeline can be a little bit confusing because it takes place both before and during the events of Resident Evil 2. I know that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but we will get there. You start off as Jill Valentine exploding out of her apartment building, which is actually how I leave for work every single morning. While trying to escape the city, Jill runs into STAR's helicopter pilot from the first game, Brad Vickers, and together they travel to a familiar place for us, the Raccoon City Police Department, which was the main location of the last game. Another thing that may be familiar to us is these canisters that were dropped from the helicopter in Resident Evil 2 to introduce Mr. X. Well, you may have noticed that there was more than one of those canisters there, and one of them is dropping the titular character of this game, the Nemesis. And it just so happens that at the Raccoon City Police Department, Jill and Brad run into the Nemesis, where he tentacles or possibly tongues through the back of Brad's head, killing him. Nemesis is a lot like Mr. X, and he's also a massive mechanic to this game. While Mr. X was very scripted and would only appear at certain times, Nemesis has a few scripted moments. There are still multiple sections where he will appear and won't appear. That's just due to the hardware limitations. But there are so many options for where he can appear, it has a very random feel, making him almost seem autonomous from run to run. And also, sometimes he has a rocket launcher. Why? My assumption is because it looks sick. Before we get too much into the new stuff, I feel like I should break down the returning features. We are still working with tank controls, pre-rendered backgrounds, puzzles galore, and scarce resources. But there's also a few new additions to the gameplay. The first one is stairs. You can actually walk upstairs now, and zombies and monsters can also walk upstairs, taking away your easy escape route. But if you accidentally walk up the stairs, you can just turn around and go back down them halfway through. And that's a massive bonus. This game also introduces the 180 quick turn, the greatest and most useful innovation in the Resident Evil series history. Quick turn just allows you to spin completely around so you don't have to do that slow little shamble trying to get away from enemies. Capcom still hasn't found a better innovation for a video game than the quick turn, and I don't think they ever will. You can also dodge and push enemies by tapping the aim button just as they attack. Some people find this really difficult due to the fixed camera angles and the character animations, but I had absolutely zero problem with this, and I constantly use them on my way through the game, which is weird because I suck at literally every parry there has ever been in a game. Do you have any idea how many Souls-like games I've started and then put down midway through the first boss because parry? It's like 4 in the last year. I want to like these games so bad, but they're so hard. The next new addition we'll talk about is the ability to craft ammo. I kind of lied but didn't lie about the scarcity of ammo thing, because now if you can find gunpowder around the world, you can just load your own shells. This also includes grenade launcher rounds, which doesn't seem entirely safe for Jill to be making her own of. Like, I get it. Jill is a highly trained special tactics police officer, but I'm pretty sure creating grenades was not a part of her police academy curriculum. If you handed me all of the ingredients to make a grenade and then asked me to do it, I would blow off the front of my face in record time. Call me up, Summer Games Done Quick. I'll show up that dog that can play games fast. The last major addition to Resident Evil 3 is the live selection segment. It's a basic choice mechanic. For example, you get the first one after Brad gets his head licked out. I shouldn't say it like that. You have the option to stay and fight the Nemesis or run away into the police station. Some of these are important and can bring you to entirely new areas, avoid or activate enemies and bosses that could be completely skipped if you chose the other option. These are cool. They're very common now, but it was a pretty wild feature to add in 1999. Although the execution for some of them are a little goofy. Like there's this one in the restaurant where you hide from Nemesis either in the kitchen or in the basement. And it is a pretty well executed use of this mechanic. But the one where the floor caves into the parking garage, you have to either fall into the hole or climb out of the way. This might be one of the dumbest choices I have ever seen in a game. You would think you have to fall into the hole to avoid this, because if you climb up, the crate would hit you. Right? That's not the case at all. She just jumps to the left and everything is fine, and she goes on with her adventure as if nothing happened. Anyways, no matter what you choose in the beginning, you end up in the RPD anyways. And you get to see the building before Leon arrives. I really like this short section of the game because we're here to get the lockpick out of Jill's desk. Which makes sense, she would have one. She is the master of unlocking. It has this kind of cool, familiar feel to it if you played the previous game, because you should know your way to the Star's office and which desk is Jill's, which Jill would also know because she works there. I know she lives in Raccoon City and the rest of the city should be just as familiar of a place, but that's not what I'm getting at. This retread through an area from a previous game is just a cool little nod to what came before, and also helps cross over the stories between both 2 and 3. This is also really cool for fans of the second game, in a game that's so different to have something so familiar. In the RPD is where you actually deal with the Nemesis outside of scripted moments. He will chase you all around the RPD, and sometimes you won't even know he's there until a rocket flies at you from across the room. Because I want to reiterate this to you. They gave this thing a rocket launcher. After escaping the RPD with a lockpick, Jill runs into a group of mercenaries that work for Umbrella. But I guess these mercenaries are good guys. They're just here to help the civilians of the city. They're hired mercenaries. Wink, wink. Nudge, nudge. Foreshadow, foreshadow. These guys definitely won't turn out to be bad guys. These guys definitely won't turn out to be bad guys. Nearly every one of these mercenaries has a way over-exaggerated accent, and I can't take it seriously anytime any of them talk. I think the thing that really makes these accents hilarious is that they're blended with the classic Resident Evil terrible voice acting and the long pauses in between responses.
How did a girl like you manage to survive?
Hey, I'm no ordinary civvy. I'm a member of STARS.
Stars? You mean the RPD Special Force Team?
Hey!
But one of these mercenaries is named Carlos, and in true early Resident Evil game fashion, Carlos becomes your partner for the game. Much like Barry, Rebecca, Ada, or Sherry that came before him, Carlos would pop up from time to time, follow you around, and help you with fights, and has a short segment where you get to play as him. This isn't our first rodeo, but this is the first time we get one of these partners that we will never see again. This is Carlos, his one and only appearance. Outside of the remake of the game, where they gave him a wicked afro for no reason. And he could have easily popped up here and there throughout the series, but maybe that's just Jill getting him back for pretending to die outside the gas station.
No!
Relax. I'm not dead yet.
Seriously, why didn't he say anything for that long and just let her think he was dead? Poor transition for the first time in the series. This game only has one main character to play as, so to change things up from run to run, sometimes items like gunpowder will be in a different area, leaving nothing in their previous spot. You can also choose to fight Nemesis instead of running away from him, and when you down him, he will drop items and upgrades for your weapons, and I think these are also 100% randomized by runs, but I'm not 100% positive. You can look that one up yourself. I'm doing this whole project in like 2 weeks and 3 days. I'm really wearing down here. I'm drinking chamomile tea because my throat is scratchy. Just give me a break on this one. If it's wrong, comment, and I'll send you a reply comment that says, Whippy. Why Whippy? I have no idea. I'm losing it here. We've also got the introduction of some new monster types like sliding worms, brain suckers, and the drain demos. This is also where the goofy names for enemies start to come into play. And you don't have to remember any of these. I've played Resident Evil 4 more times than a mother of two has heard Baby Shark, and I still can't remember that this thing's called the Novistador. It's the invisible grasshopper. Just deal with it. As usual, I'll hit you with a few little things, and then we'll wrap up with a bunch of story spoilers. I know a lot of people prefer their Resident Evils to stay in the lane of survival horror and not try to push into the action too much. But I love Resident Evil 5. I'm one of the few people who like 6. And while I prefer them to have more horror to them, I really think the best Resident Evils are the ones that blend action and horror together. With the controls having a slight upgrade and feeling a little more fluid here, and the blend of the pre-rendered backgrounds looking just as beautiful as they always have. But now in a new full city setting, this game really has the perfect balance of blending the action and horror versions of the series. I mean, it's no Resi 4, but compared to all the things I had heard about this game over the years, it's way better than anything I would have ever expected. Yeah, this is one that I actually had like zero experience with. I played the remake when it came out and absolutely loved it, but for this original version of the game, I had maybe put in like 20 minutes of gameplay. But I'm really happy I did this project so that I can go in and fill that hole in my Resident Evil knowledge. But I'm also glad I did it just because this game is actually really good, and I would highly recommend it to anyone who is a fan of the more action-based Resident Evil games, and even to the people that are more fans of the horror versions. But that's where I'm going to end it for the non-story spoiler viewers. So if you're out of here, go ahead and subscribe so you remember to come back tomorrow, or whenever you're finished Resident Evil 3. I know this is the perfect time to start playing that game that came out 20 years ago. And go ahead and leave me a comment when you come back so I can also leave you a whippy, I guess. So the mercenaries that Carlos works with work for Umbrella, and they are known as the UBCS, Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasure Service, because Resi really likes acronyms. They tell Jill they can get a signal to the escape helicopter if they make it to the clock tower and ring the bell. While looking for parts to repair the cable car to get to the clock tower, Jill catches the leader of the mercenary group, Nikolai, who has just killed someone that was about to turn into a zombie. They fix the cable car, Nikolai goes missing, and everybody assumes he's dead. Nemesis attacks the cable car. One of the other mercenaries blows themselves up with a grenade to stop Nemesis, crashing the cable car into the clock tower. Jill and Carlos get split up in the wreckage. Classic Resident Evil. Nemesis infects Jill. Classic Resident Evil. Jill defeats him and then passes out from the infection. But Carlos finds her, and then he finds a vaccine for the T-virus at a nearby Umbrella hospital that he uses to cure Jill 3 days later, which brings us to the part in the timeline that Resident Evil 2 takes place in. Jill goes to find an escape route where she runs into Nikolai. Turns out he's not dead, he's just secretly a bad guy. Classic dude's name Nikolai. Carlos tells Jill the government is going to nuke Raccoon City to stop the T-virus from spreading, so Jill goes looking for a helicopter for her and Carlos to escape in. Now, there are 3 different endings for Resi 3. One where Nemesis kills Nikolai, then Jill kills Nemesis, with a giant railgun, drops a one-liner,
You want stars? I'll give you stars.
and flies off in a helicopter. Or Nikolai steals the helicopter, flies away safely, never to be seen again. Then Jill kills Nemesis with a giant railgun, drops a one-liner, and then Washington Monument-sized Magnum wielder Barry Burton shows up to save them in his helicopter. Or, lastly, Nikolai steals the helicopter, Jill blows up the helicopter, killing Nikolai. Then Jill kills Nemesis with a giant railgun, drops a sick one-liner, and then hat so big it's funny just because it's so big sized Magnum wielder Barry Burton shows up and saves them with a helicopter. The Resident Evil 5 manual says they escaped with the help of Barry Burton, but that only narrows it down to 2 possible endings. Some people say there's a file in one of the Outbreak games that confirms Nikolai's still alive. Some say that's a translation error. I like to think that Jill blows up his helicopter with a knife, like a real Resident Evil player would. Either way, it doesn't matter, because we never see Nikolai again after this. So it ends with Jill escaping and Nemesis dead after a sick one-liner and a giant railgun, and you subscribing so you don't forget to come back for tomorrow's video. And commenting or whatever it is you want to do. I don't really care. Survival horror entrance or whatever, go do that.